The wind howled across the northern plains like 1,000 restless spirits, carrying snowflakes that stung like tiny needles against exposed skin. The land was silent in a way that made the heart ache, a silence that spoke of isolation, danger, and secrets buried beneath layers of ice. Kalen, the Alpha King, rode atop his black stallion, the only sound the crunch of hooves against the frozen ground. His dark cloak whipped around him as he scanned the horizon. He was a man of legend in his kingdom, feared and respected in equal measure. Strong, unyielding, with eyes like storm clouds, Kalen had ruled for more than a decade. His word was law, his presence commanding. Yet even he felt the weight of this winter like an invisible chain. This part of the kingdom was quiet, too quiet, and Kalen trusted no silence. The patrol had been routine, or so he had thought. His instincts, however, told him otherwise. Something was out there, something that didn't belong to the snow, something alive. And then he saw it. A figure, curled and fragile, lay half buried in the snow at the edge of a frozen copse of trees. Kalen's horse shied slightly, sensing the unnatural stillness, but he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The closer he rode, the more details became clear. The figure was a woman, small, shivering, her hair matted with frost. She was pregnant, her rounded belly barely protected beneath tattered clothing. Kalen dismounted in one swift motion, boots crunching against the ice. His gloved hands reached her carefully. Despite the chill, he could feel life beneath her skin. The steady, faint pulse of someone clinging desperately to survival. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned for signs of danger, but found none, only weakness, fear, and something else. Something that stirred a spark within him he rarely felt. Compassion. The woman's eyes flickered open. They were wide, terrified, and yet strangely fierce. She tried to pull away, but her strength was gone. "Don't touch me," she whispered, voice trembling like the wind itself. "Stay away." Kalen did not move. Instead, he knelt beside her, his presence both protective and powerful. "You will not survive out here alone," he said. "I can carry you. You will be safe with me." She shook her head weakly. "You don't understand. I'm cursed." Kalen's brow furrowed. "Cursed?" His tone softened. "Just slightly. Then I will protect you from the curse. From everyone." For a moment, she stared at him as if he were a figure from a legend. Something about him was different. He was not afraid, and yet he did not demand obedience. He simply existed as a shield, and in that moment, she allowed herself to hope. With careful movements, Kalen lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, though her condition must have been exhausting. Her shivering intensified, but his cloak was thick, warm, and offered some protection against the icy wind. Kalen mounted his horse again, adjusting her carefully across the saddle, before gripping the reins with one hand and keeping the other lightly on her back. The journey back to the fortress was long. Snow swirled around them, and the wind seemed determined to push them back. But Kalen's horse was tireless. He did not speak, sensing that the silence was safer for her. Occasionally, she shifted, and he noticed the small, wary movements, the way she flinched at his proximity, yet never tried to escape. Finally, the fortress appeared on the horizon, its dark towers rising like jagged teeth from the snowy landscape. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the walls seemed almost alive, breathing and waiting. Kalen tightened his grip on the reins. The gates opened as his presence was recognized, the guards bowing to him. No questions were asked. He had brought many survivors before, and no one dared interfere with the Alpha King's decisions. Inside, the great hall was lit by roaring fires, the warmth immediately cutting through the chill that clung to the Omega woman. Kaelin laid her gently on a pile of furs near the hearth. She curled into herself, shivering, and he noticed bruises along her arms and legs. Someone had tried to harm her. Someone had tried to take what was most precious, her life, or perhaps the life she carried. He knelt beside her once more, studying her face. Snowflakes still clung to her hair, and her skin was pale, almost luminous in the firelight. She looked small, fragile, and yet there was a resilience in her eyes that he respected. "I will not let them touch you," Kaelin said softly, his words a vow more than a promise. "No one." She looked at him then. Really looked, as if searching his eyes for deceit or cruelty. Finding none, she let out a shaky breath and whispered, "Why? Are you helping me?" "For thode. 45. We're never cool." "Because you are alive," he replied simply. "Because the world has no right to destroy what is innocent." Her lips trembled. She wanted to speak, to tell him that she was not innocent, that her child carried a shadow, a curse, a destiny no one could understand. But she could not. The words caught in her throat. Instead, she allowed herself to rest, her body finally relaxing against the warmth of the furs and the silent strength of Kaelin's presence. Hours passed. The fire burned low, and the fortress outside continued its quiet, watchful vigilance. Kaelin remained by her side, unwavering, a sentinel against a world that had been cruel to her. He thought of the cold, of the dangers that awaited outside, and of the mysterious power he sensed within her. This child, this life growing inside her, was more than just a burden or a secret. It was a spark of something greater, something that even he could not fully comprehend yet. Night deepened, and the wind outside became a chorus of icy whispers. Alara, exhausted and still wary, drifted into a fitful sleep. In her dreams, the snow was no longer cold. It became a place of shadows and light, a place where she was safe and yet powerful. She dreamed of a man with storm-colored eyes, who lifted her from despair and whispered that no one would ever harm her again. Kaelin watched her, the weight of his own past pressing against his chest. He had been alone for so long, ruling with strength and fear, never allowing himself to hope, to trust, to feel. And yet here she was broken, yet unyielding, vulnerable, yet fierce. She had entered his life like a sudden storm, forcing him to confront emotions he had long buried. Protectiveness, longing, and a strange, unfamiliar ache of desire that was not about possession, but about keeping her safe. He clenched his jaw, shaking off the momentary weakness. There would be time for emotion later. For now, he had to ensure her survival. No one would take her from him. No one. Outside, in the shadow of the fortress walls, a figure watched from the tree line, cloaked, hidden, silent. Eyes glinted like shards of ice in the moonlight. The watcher knew of the Omega's presence. They knew of her child. And they knew that if Kaelin dared protect her, it would ignite a conflict that could consume kingdoms. But Kaelin did not see them yet. All he knew was the woman before him, shivering, frightened, and carrying life that must be preserved. And he swore, quietly, fiercely, to himself and to the snow, to the child, and to her. No one would ever touch her again. The storm outside raged, but inside the fortress, a fragile warmth took root. Kaelin had found her in the snow, and in doing so, something inside him began to thaw. The Alpha King, feared by all, had taken his first step toward a destiny he could never have foreseen. One where protection, love, and redemption would be as dangerous as any war. And somewhere beyond the walls, in the swirling white of the frozen night, danger waited patiently, watching, knowing that the story had only just begun. The fortress stood tall against the winter wind, a dark crown atop a frozen hill. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of pine smoke and iron. Kaelin paced through the corridors, boots echoing against cold stone floors. Elara rested in a chamber lined with furs and thick blankets, her body slowly recovering from the ordeal in the snow. Though the fire's warmth seeped into her bones, her eyes remained alert, wary of every shadow. Kaelin had never been a man to show weakness, yet the sight of her had stirred something he had not felt in years, a fierce need to protect, paired with a gnawing uncertainty. The court had always demanded absolute control, obedience, and power. But here, in the quiet of his fortress, Kaelin found himself questioning his own authority. For the first time, he feared not his enemies, but the fragility of life itself. Ilara's hands trembled as she adjusted the furs around her. "Why are you keeping me here?" she asked softly, her voice still uncertain. "I am no one. I am cursed." Kaelin stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "No one is cursed enough to deserve death," he said firmly. "You are under my protection. As long as you are here, nothing will harm you." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "You don't know what I carry. The child. It is said that one like this can bring disaster, that it changes everything." Kaelin stepped closer, resting a hand on the edge of the bed near her. "Then we will face it together. If the world fears this child, then let the world see what I will do to protect it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire. Ilara's eyes softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself a sliver of trust. She could feel the strength radiating from him, not just the strength of a ruler, but of a man willing to stand against fate itself. But peace in the fortress was fragile. Rumors traveled faster than wind in the northern mountains, and Kaelin knew that the court would not quietly accept harboring an Omega, especially a pregnant one linked to whispers of prophecy. Lords and ladies came to him, faces pale and anxious, demanding answers. "She must be sent away," one noble insisted, voice sharp. "Her child. It is not meant to be. The kingdom cannot risk it." Kaelin's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword at his side. "You do not speak for me," he said quietly. Yet the words carried authority that silenced the room. "She is under my protection. Her life, and the child's life, belong to me." The noble's lips pressed into a thin line, but he could not argue. Kaelin's reputation was built on more than fear. It was built on action, on unwavering strength. Anyone who dared defy him would find that out the hard way. Ilara watched the exchange quietly, her pulse quickening. She had never been treated as someone with a voice, someone who could choose her own fate. Yet here, with Kaelin, she was seen. It was a strange, frightening, and yet liberating feeling. Days passed in the fortress, each one colder and darker than the last, but also filled with a growing tension that neither could ignore. Ilara began to notice subtle changes in herself, moments when the cold bent to her will, when the snow outside seemed to swirl around her in response to her fear or anger. Small things, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably there. Kaelin noticed it too, though he did not speak of it. He had dealt with many strange forces in his life, but there was something ancient and powerful about her presence. She was not just fragile, she carried a strength that could rival kingdoms. And the thought of her being threatened ignited a fire within him, unlike any battle he had ever fought. One evening, as the sun dipped behind jagged peaks and cast long shadows across the fortress walls, Kaelin entered the chamber quietly. Ilara sat near the fire, staring into the flames. Her face was pale, but there was a resolve in her eyes that matched his own. "You feel it, don't you?" Kaelin asked softly, almost hesitantly. Ilara looked up, startled. "Feel what?" "The power, the energy. You are not merely carrying a child. Something ancient sleeps within you. Something that could change everything." Her lips trembled, and she shook her head. "I don't understand it. I never wanted this. I never wanted to be special. Kaelin knelt beside her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. Being special does not make you weak, he said. It makes you dangerous. In the right way. But only if you survive. Quote. 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 Ilara's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, fear and longing collided. She wanted to retreat, to vanish into the shadows of her own doubts, yet she felt a strange safety in his presence. And if I fail, she whispered, then I will carry both of you, Kaelin replied, his voice steady, unyielding. I will not allow anyone to harm you or your child. Not while I breathe. The days that followed were filled with training, observation, and quiet tension. Kaelin brought skilled tutors and healers to the fortress to ensure Ilara's safety and well-being. He trained her not in combat, but in awareness how to read signs, how to survive if danger came again. Ilara learned quickly. Her mind sharp, despite exhaustion and fear. She realized that Kaelin did not seek to dominate her, but to empower her in the ways that mattered most. Yet the kingdom beyond the walls was not idle. Messengers arrived from rival lands, bringing demands and threats. One emissary, cloaked in the colors of a distant crown, knelt before Kaelin. Your Majesty, he said with forced respect. The child she carries, it is said to be part of a prophecy. Hand her over, and peace will be preserved. Refuse, and war will follow. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, storm clouds in his gaze. Peace, at the cost of the innocent, is not peace, he said coldly. She is under my protection. You will leave, and carry your lies elsewhere. The emissary's hands trembled slightly, and he bowed lower. Then, know that your defiance will bring consequences beyond your walls. Kaelin's jaw tightened, but he did not move. He watched as the man left, the threat lingering like frost in the air. He turned back to Ilara, who had been silently observing. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, as if to shield the life growing inside her. You see, she whispered, voice tinged with fear. The world does not want me. They will come for me. Kaelin knelt beside her once more, taking her hands in his. Then, let them come, he said firmly. They will meet the Alpha King, and they will see that no one threatens what is mine to protect. Ilara's eyes widened. Yours? Kaelin's grip tightened, not in possession, but in unwavering promise. Mine to protect, mine to shield, mine to ensure lives are not taken by fear or hate. Night fell over the fortress, deep and cold. The snow swirled against the walls like restless spirits. Ilara could not sleep, her thoughts heavy with fear, uncertainty, and an unfamiliar warmth that stirred in her chest whenever Kaelin was near. She wanted to flee, to vanish into the darkness. But something in his presence anchored her. She realized that for the first time in her life, she was not entirely alone. Kaelin, meanwhile, stood by the window in the shadowed hall, looking out into the swirling white. His mind was a storm of strategy, instinct, and something far more personal, something he could not yet name. Protecting her was no longer a matter of duty or honor. It was personal. It was urgent. And it frightened him in ways he had not known possible. Somewhere beyond the mountains, unseen eyes watched the fortress. The emissaries had returned to report the Alpha King's refusal, their whispers carrying tales of prophecy, danger, and power. The Omega's presence was no longer a secret, and soon, forces beyond Kaelin's walls would test him and Ilara in ways neither of them could imagine. Yet inside the fortress, warmth persisted, a fragile light against the winter storm. Kaelin sat near the fire, silently watching over Ilara as she slept. His thoughts were a mix of worry and admiration. He had found her in the snow, half dead and alone, and now she had become the center of something larger than either of them. And though neither spoke of it aloud, both knew that the quiet moments of trust, of connection, of longing, were only the beginning. A storm approached, one that would challenge their strength, their courage, and the bond that had begun to form between them. Kaylin's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent oath against the coming darkness. "No one," he whispered, voice firm as the mountains, "will ever touch you. Not while I breathe. Not while I am Alpha." Outside, the wind howled, carrying secrets, threats, and the promise of trials yet to come. The kingdom was divided, the prophecy whispered in shadow. And the Omega's power began to stir an awakening that neither she nor Kaylin fully understood. And in that moment, both of them felt it. The world outside the fortress would not wait. The choice was no longer theirs alone. The northern wind had grown sharper, cutting through the fortress walls like knives. Snow lay in deep drifts across the courtyard, frozen under layers of frost. Kaylin stood atop the battlements, cloak fluttering like a dark banner, his eyes scanning the horizon. Every gust of wind carried a warning the rival kingdom was gathering, and they would not wait much longer. Inside the fortress, Elara moved carefully through the halls, wrapped in thick furs, yet her presence felt like a spark of warmth amid the cold stone. She had changed in the days since Kaylin rescued her. Her senses had sharpened, her movements more certain, and small bursts of power had begun to manifest, frost forming in patterns at her touch, snow swirling around her when she became frightened or angry. At first, Kaylin had tried to guide her, to keep her from discovering the full extent of her abilities too quickly, but he realized she could not be contained, nor could her strength be ignored. It was a part of her, like the life she carried, and he needed her to embrace it if they were to survive the trials ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the jagged mountains, painting the sky in streaks of blood red and gold, Kaylin found her at the edge of the fortress walls. She was staring into the snowy landscape, her hands lifting slightly as the wind obeyed her subtle gestures, forming whorls and eddies in the air. "You are learning," Kaylin said quietly, approaching her without making a sound. Elara turned, startled for only a moment before meeting his gaze. I don't know what I am doing," she admitted. "I feel it, but I can't control it fully. What if it hurts someone?" Kaylin stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on hers. The touch grounded her, like an anchor in the midst of a storm. "Power is not always perfect at first," he said. "It must be guided, and you are not alone. I am here. We will face it together." She studied him, and for a moment, fear and longing collided in her chest. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the snow and hide from her destiny. But something in Kaylin's presence held her in place. For the first time, she believed that she might survive not just for herself, but for her child. The tranquility did not last. A messenger arrived that night, cloaked and exhausted, bearing a warning that made the fortress stir with urgency. "Your Alpha Majesty," he said, bowing low. "Scouts report that the enemy approaches. They know the Omega is here, and they bring more than soldiers, they bring sorcery and beasts bred for war." Kaylin's jaw tightened. "Then we prepare," he said, voice low and commanding. "Every wall, every soldier, every spell we use, everything we have. And we make them regret daring to threaten what I protect." Elara watched him, admiration and fear entwined in her chest. She had seen him fight before, in the snow, in the cold, when danger appeared unannounced. But she realized now that his strength was more than physical. It was a shield, a presence that demanded loyalty and courage. And for the first time, she wanted to be worthy of that protection. Over the next days, Kaylin trained her not in the art of swordplay, but in the awareness of power. He taught her how to sense the shifts in the wind, the subtle hints of danger hidden in the snow, and how to channel her abilities to shield herself rather than harm others. At first, Elara struggled, frustrated by the limits of her understanding. But slowly, she began to see patterns. to feel the rhythm of the frost and the flow of cold as a force she could influence. One night, a blizzard stronger than any before descended upon the fortress. The wind roared like a wild beast, snow driving against the walls in furious sheets. Kaelin and Ilara were in the training hall, the fires barely keeping the cold at bay. "Ilara," Kaelin said, his voice cutting through the storm outside. "Focus. Feel the energy around you. Let it obey you, not scare you." Ilara's hands trembled. She lifted them instinctively, and snowflakes rose from the floor, swirling into intricate patterns around her. She gasped as the frost coalesced into shapes, tiny, shimmering forms that hovered in the air like spirits. I did it," she whispered. Kaelin smiled faintly, pride in his eyes. "Yes, you did. And you will do more. But remember, power without control can destroy, not protect." Her eyes met his, and in that gaze was a silent acknowledgement. Trust. Reliance. Something unspoken. Something neither of them dared to name aloud. Yet both felt it growing stronger each day. But danger never rested. The next morning, scouts returned with news that chilled even Kaelin's seasoned heart. The rival kingdom had dispatched a specialized force, a battalion of soldiers, trained assassins, and sorcerers who had long sought to control the prophecy linked to Ilara's child. They would arrive before the next full moon, and their goal was singular: capture the Omega, take the child, and break Kaelin's power. Kaelin's mind raced, strategy and instinct colliding. He could feel the tension in the fortress, the anxiety in the soldiers, and the quiet unease in Ilara. She, too, could sense the threat, her instincts alerting her to shadows that humans often overlooked. That night, they sat together by the hearth, the storm raging outside. Ilara traced patterns in the frost on the window pane, her fingers leaving delicate trails that shimmered in the firelight. "Kaelin," she said softly, "I feel something. Like the child knows the danger coming. Like it senses the battle before it happens." Kaelin studied her, a storm of emotion behind his storm-colored eyes. "Then we protect it together. And you," he added, placing a steady hand on hers, "will not face this alone." Ilara's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own. But the truth was undeniable. She could not. Not without him. Not without the man who had saved her life, carried her through snow and fear, and stood as an unmovable shield against the world's cruelty. The following day, the enemy forces arrived, moving through the snow like shadows given flesh. Kaelin's scouts warned him in time, and the fortress gates were closed, soldiers positioned at every point of entry. The air was electric, charged with anticipation, fear, and the cold bite of destiny. As the first wave approached, Ilara's powers manifested in a sudden surge. Snow rose in spirals, twisting into walls and barriers that slowed the attackers. Kaelin moved alongside her, leading his soldiers with unmatched skill, striking fear into those who dared breach the gates. But the real challenge came when the enemy sorcerers emerged, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. They aimed for Ilara, seeking to seize the child and harness its power. Kaelin's instincts kicked in. He placed himself between them, his sword a streak of dark steel, his presence commanding and unyielding. "Ilara!" he shouted. "Use it now. Trust yourself." Her hands lifted, trembling but determined. Snow and ice surged around her, forming a protective shield that deflected the sorcery and sent the enemy stumbling. She felt the power within her align, not chaotic but precise, controlled, guided by her will and Kaelin's unwavering presence. The battle raged through the night. Kaelin fought with a ferocity born of love and protection, while Ilara used her powers to guard the fortress, her child, and the people inside. Each clash of steel and magic sent sparks into the cold air, illuminating their faces with firelight and frost. Finally, As dawn broke over the snow-covered plains, the enemy retreated, battered and defeated. The fortress stood, unbroken, a testament to the strength of the Alpha King and the Omega, who had begun to embrace her destiny. Kaelin approached Alara, who was trembling from exhaustion but smiling faintly, relief and awe in her eyes. "You did it," he said softly, voice a mixture of pride and wonder. She shook her head, laughing quietly. "We did it. Together." For a moment, they simply stood there, hands brushing, hearts racing. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in fear, fire, and ice. And yet, even in victory, a shadow lingered, the knowledge that the prophecy was not yet fulfilled, that the child she carried held secrets the world might not understand, and that enemies still watched from afar, waiting for the moment to strike again. Kaelin's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent promise. "No one," he said, voice low and certain, "will harm you. Not now, not ever. You and this child are mine to protect." Alara's eyes met his, filled with gratitude, trust, and a budding longing she could no longer ignore. For the first time, she believed in a future where she would not be alone, where her power would not frighten, and where someone could stand beside her not as a master, but as an equal, a protector, and perhaps something more. The fortress was safe for now. But beyond the mountains, beyond the horizon, unseen eyes waited. The prophecy was stirring. The child was awakening. And the storm of destiny, though momentarily held at bay, was far from over. Kaelin and Alara had survived the night, but the trials of fire and ice had only just begun. The fortress stood silent under the pale light of dawn, the snow reflecting a cold, almost blinding white. But inside, the air was tense, heavy with anticipation and fear. Kaelin stood atop the battlements, cloak billowing behind him, eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy had returned stronger, more cunning, and more determined than before. Alara stood beside him, her hands folded in front of her, but her body braced, ready. Her powers had grown in the days since the last attack. The snow seemed alive around her, responding to her emotions, twisting and swirling as if it had a mind of its own. She had learned to trust it, to guide it, and now it was their shield, their weapon, and their bond. Kaelin's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her lips trembled slightly. "I am with you." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Together," he said, "always." The enemy came in the mid-morning, moving like shadows over the snow-covered plains. Soldiers, sorcerers, and beasts, bred for war, advanced, confident, and unrelenting. Their banners flapped violently in the wind, dark symbols etched against the white world. Kaelin drew his sword, the black steel glinting ominously, and gave a sharp command. "Hold the walls, protect the fortress, protect her." The soldiers surged forward, rallying behind their Alpha King, their fear replaced by determination. Kaelin's presence was magnetic, his power undeniable, and every man and woman under his command felt it in their bones. They would fight, not just for their lives, but for the woman he had sworn to protect. Alara raised her hands, letting her power flow outward. Snow rose from the ground, forming jagged barriers and spiraling defenses that slowed the enemy's approach. Ice formed under the feet of advancing soldiers, tripping them and sending them tumbling into drifts. The beasts snarled and hesitated as her magic brushed against them, bending their senses and confusing them. Kaelin moved like a storm through the battlefield, cutting down foes with swift, precise strikes. His movements were calculated, a dance of power and authority. Yet every swing of his blade was fueled by a single thought: protect the Omega, protect the child. He felt Alara's energy beside him, guiding and strengthening him, and he knew they were connected not just by circumstance, but by a bond that had been forged through fear, trust, and an unspoken longing. The enemy sorcerers, however, were not easily defeated. Their magic collided with Ilara's, in bursts of freezing light and swirling snow. The clash was chaotic, dangerous, and magnificent, a storm of power that lit the gray sky in flashes of blue and white. Ilara felt her strength waver at times, but Kaelin's presence steadied her. His words echoed in her mind. "Trust yourself. Trust us. We face this together." The battle reached its peak when the enemy's leader emerged, a figure cloaked in darkness, eyes glowing with malice. He aimed directly at Ilara, seeking to capture the child and twist its destiny. Kaelin stepped forward, placing himself between them. His sword met the dark magic with a clash that echoed across the snow-covered plains, sparks flying as steel met sorcery. "Ilara!" he shouted, voice carrying over the roar of battle. "Now! Focus!" Ilara lifted her hands, summoning all her strength. Snow rose around her in a brilliant dome of white light, a shield that glowed with a purity born of determination and love. The enemy leader recoiled, his magic unable to penetrate the barrier. For the first time, Ilara felt a surge of control, her fear replaced by clarity. Together, Kaelin and Ilara pushed forward, moving as one. Each strike of his sword, each movement of her power, worked in harmony. Soldiers of the enemy faltered, their formations breaking. Sorcerers fell, their magic dissipating against the combined force of alpha strength and omega power. And the beasts, sensing the shift, fled into the snow, defeated or subdued. At last, the enemy leader stood alone, cornered and weakened. Kaelin advanced, sword raised, but his eyes were fixed on Ilara. "It is finished," he said, low and steady. "No one will harm you or your child again." Ilara's hands trembled as the snow settled around them. "Kaelin, we did it," she whispered. "No," he replied, lowering his sword. "We did it. Together." The fortress was battered but standing. Soldiers cheered, voices carrying through the cold air, but Kaelin and Ilara paid little attention. Their focus was on each other, on the fragile bond that had grown amidst fire and ice, fear and power. Days passed, and the kingdom slowly began to heal. News of the battle spread, and the legend of the Alpha King who had protected a pregnant Omega became a tale whispered in every hall and village. But Kaelin and Ilara remained secluded, taking the time to understand one another, to heal together, and to prepare for the life that was to come. Ilara's powers continued to grow, but now she wielded them with purpose and confidence. She realized that the child she carried was not a curse, but a gift, a symbol of hope and strength, born of a bond between two people who had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. One quiet evening, Kaelin led her to the highest tower of the fortress. The sky was clear, the stars sparkling like diamonds above the snow-covered land. He took her hands in his gaze steady, unflinching. "Ilara," he said, voice soft but firm, "I swore I would protect you. I swore that no one would ever touch you or your child. That oath still stands. But there is more I want you to know." Her heart quickened, a mixture of fear and hope swirling inside her. "What is it?" she asked. Kaelin knelt in the snow, hands still holding hers. "I am yours," he said simply, "not as a king, not as an alpha, but as someone who loves you, who will stand by you no matter what. You and this child are my life now, and I will never leave you." Another mile. Tears welled in her eyes, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "Kaelin, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "Just believe it, and trust me. That is all I ask." The wind whispered through the tower, carrying with it the remnants of the storm, the echoes of battle, and the promise of peace. For the first time, Elara felt free. Free from fear. Free from doubt. And free to embrace the life growing within her, and the man who had saved her from the snow and from the world. Weeks later, the child was born a small, strong infant, radiant in its innocence and power. Kaelin held the child first, cradling it gently, eyes filled with wonder and determination. Elara stood beside him, hands brushing his, and for a moment, the fortress, the kingdom, and even the snow outside faded away. There was only them, bound by love, courage, and destiny. Kaelin looked into Elara's eyes. "No one," he whispered, voice firm and unyielding, "will ever harm you again. Not while I live, not while we breathe. This kingdom, this world, will learn that love and protection are stronger than fear and power." Elara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Together," she echoed. The kingdom outside began to stir once more. Snow melted in patches as spring approached, rivers thawed, and life slowly returned to the lands that had been frozen for so long. But within the fortress, a new legend had been born. The Alpha King and the Omega, united by fate, love, and the promise of protection. And while distant eyes still watched, waiting, plotting, and waiting for another opportunity, Kaelin and Elara knew this truth above all. No threat, no prophecy, no shadow could ever sever the bond they had forged in snow, fire, and trial. They had faced the impossible, survived the storm, and emerged not just as protectors, but as partners, equals, and a family. The snow fell softly that night, not in fury, but in peace. And for the first time in a long while, the fortress glowed not with fire alone, but with hope, love, and the quiet strength of a king and his Omega, united against the world, unyielding and unbroken.